Fighting next to humanity, I felt true fear for the first time. Part 1. First, contact on the battlefield. The Zirathi warships came down like meteors. Their weapons burned through the sky with a light that had no color, and the Valiant shook hard enough to throw Commander Daniel Hayes against the bridge console. Blood ran down his face, but he didn't wipe it away. He had no time for that. The bridge was chaos. Screens flashed red. Alarms screamed. Crew members ran from station to station, shouting reports that nobody wanted to hear. The Cathran destroyer on their left wing had just exploded. 3 Solari cruisers were retreating. The Vex ships were already gone. Daniel gripped the edge of the console and forced himself to think. Around him, his crew looked to him for answers. They were scared. He could see it in their faces. But they were still here. They were still fighting. A young officer named Kevin ran up to him. His uniform was torn and his hand shook. "Sir, we're losing the eastern flank. The Zirathi are pushing through our defenses." Daniel nodded. He had already seen the tactical display. The Zirathi had superior numbers, superior weapons, and superior coordination. On paper, they had already won. But Daniel had never fought a war on paper. He fought it with people. He fought it with choices. "Get me the assault teams," Daniel said. "Sir, a direct assault on that supply depot is suicide," Kevin said. His voice cracked a little. "The Zirathi have triple the firepower." Daniel looked at his young officer. Kevin was right. It was suicide. But it was also the only move left on the board that meant something. The Zirathi expected them to retreat. They expected humans to choose survival over victory. Daniel was going to show them something different. "I didn't ask if it was smart," Daniel said. "I asked you to get me the assault teams." Within the hour, volunteers filled the briefing room. Sarah Duncan was there. She was a lieutenant with 10 years of combat experience and a scar that ran from her jaw to her neck. Marcus was there too, young but steady. Patricia had requested the mission, even though she was recovering from an injury. Chris was a recruit who'd only been in the military for 6 months. When Daniel asked who wanted to go on a mission with almost no chance of success, Chris had raised his hand without hesitation. Daniel looked at their faces as he explained the plan. They would hit the Zirathi supply depot. They would destroy the weapon stores and the power generators. They would do it fast, and they would do it hard. Then they would get out before the Zirathi could respond. "What are our chances?" Patricia asked. Daniel didn't lie. "We might lose half the team. Maybe more." Nobody moved to leave. Nobody asked for a different assignment. Sarah just nodded and checked her weapon. Marcus started reviewing the facility layout. Patricia rolled her shoulder, testing the injury. That was when Daniel realized something important. It wasn't that these soldiers weren't afraid. He could see the fear in their eyes. Their hands weren't completely steady. Their breathing was too fast. Fear was there, living inside their chests. But they made the choice anyway. They chose to go anyway. The assault team moved out at dusk. Their transport cut through the atmosphere of the planet below, heading for the supply depot that the Zirathi believed was safe. The Zirathi commanders were watching from their warships above. They had sensors and computers that could calculate the exact odds of human success. The odds were almost zero. When the assault team hit the ground, everything moved fast. Sarah led the first squad through the main entrance. Marcus and Patricia provided cover fire. Chris ran with the explosives, his hands steady despite his terror. They had trained for this. They had trained 1,000 times. But training was different than the real thing. The real thing had no pause button. The Zirathi soldiers responded quickly, but they were caught off guard. The humans moved with purpose. They moved with speed. They moved like they had nothing to lose because in that moment, they really didn't. The first explosion lit up the night. The power generators went up in a column of fire and smoke. Alarms started screaming inside the facility. The Zirathi soldiers started pouring out, but Sarah's team was already moving deeper into the complex. Chris planted charges on the main weapon storage. His hands didn't shake. He'd been terrified when they launched from the ship, terrified when they landed, terrified when the first shots started firing. But now that he was doing the job, he found something quiet inside himself. A focus, a purpose. The second explosion was bigger than the first. The entire east wing of the facility collapsed. Flames rolled across the desert floor. The Zirathi were scrambling now. Their commanders were sending reinforcements. But the assault team was already running for the extraction point. They almost made it clean. Then, a burst of laser fire caught Robert, one of the younger soldiers. He went down hard, and his leg was burning. Sarah didn't even slow down. She grabbed his arm and threw him over her shoulder. Marcus laid down a wall of fire to cover the retreat. Patricia was shouting coordinates into her radio. The transport rose up from the desert with its ramp still open. The team was throwing themselves inside as Zirathi weapons fire tore through the air around them. Chris was the last one in, and he had to crawl across the ramp floor as the pilot fired the engines to full power. As they climbed back toward the Valiant, Daniel watched the sensor readouts. The supply depot was gone. The Zirathi had lost a month's worth of weapons and supplies. The assault had cost him 15 soldiers. 5 of them were dead. 15 out of 40. 25% casualties. In terms of military mathematics, the mission was a disaster. But when Daniel stood in the bay as the assault team came down the ramp, he saw something different. He saw Sarah supporting Robert's weight, moving toward the medical bay. He saw Marcus checking on Chris to make sure the young soldier was okay. He saw Patricia looking back at the empty space where Robert had been dragged onto the transport, grateful that they had gotten him back alive. These soldiers had gone into impossible odds, and they hadn't broken. They hadn't run. They hadn't given up. They had lost people, and they were still standing. One of the Zirathi commanders was watching from his ship. His name was Vex Admiral Krell, and he had been fighting across the galaxy for longer than some civilizations had existed. He had conquered 17 systems. He had seen 1,000 different species fight and lose and break. He had never seen anything like this before. The humans have lost. By every measure that mattered, the mission should have ended in retreat. The Zirathi had superior numbers at the depot. They had superior weapons. They had superior response time. And yet the humans had succeeded anyway. Krell watched Commander Daniel Hayes come down from the bridge to meet his assault team. He watched the human commander look at his soldiers' faces and saw something move in the human's expression. Krell couldn't identify the emotion. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something deeper. The Zirathi didn't understand emotions. They processed them as data points, as chemical reactions in their crystalline structures. But Krell was beginning to wonder if he was wrong about that. He ordered his tactical officer to bring him all available data on human physiology, human psychology, and human battlefield behavior. He wanted to understand what he had just witnessed. Krell had conquered 17 systems through superiority. But for the first time in his existence, he was starting to feel something he couldn't quite name. It tasted like fear. Fighting next to humanity, I felt true fear for the first time. Part 2. Understanding the incomprehensible, Admiral Krell made a decision that surprised his own command staff. He would assign one of his tactical officers to fight alongside the humans on their next mission. The officer's name was Preth, and he was a Solari, a species known for their perfect logical reasoning and their complete absence of emotional response. Preth received his assignment with what passed for shock among his kind. A slight disruption in his crystalline structure. A momentary pause in his response systems. "You want me to fight with humans?" Preth's voice was flat, emotionless. I want you to observe them, Krell said. Fight with them. Learn what makes them function. They are weak. The data is clear. Humans have slower reaction times, shorter lifespans, and inferior physical strength. Then they should be easy for you to understand, Krell said. Preth reported to the human commander the next day. Daniel Hayes looked at the Solaria officer with mild surprise. An alien observer on his team was new. He had no idea what Krell wanted to accomplish. The mission briefing was straightforward. A Zirathi research facility sat on the next planet. The humans needed to secure it before the Zirathi could destroy their research data. The Zirathi had already reinforced the position, which meant the humans would be walking into heavy resistance. Lieutenant Sarah Duncan would lead the team. With her came Marcus, Patricia, and the young recruit Chris. Preth would observe Dot as the team prepared their equipment. Preth made calculations. Based on the facility's defensive position, based on the number of Zirathi soldiers, based on the expected response time of reinforcements, Preth determined that the human team had a 17% chance of success. 17%. Those were odds that Preth would never accept. But the humans didn't seem to care about odds. They loaded ammunition. They checked weapons. They ate food with the same focus they would have brought to any other day. Chris, the young recruit, even made jokes as he strapped on his armor. "You think you're gonna die?" Preth asked him. Chris paused. He was young, probably not yet 25. His hand shook slightly as he fastened the last armor plate. "Yeah," Chris said. "Probably. But so are you eventually. Might as well make it mean something." Preth processed this statement and stored it in his memory banks. It made no logical sense that the transport descended through the atmosphere of the planet. Below them, the research facility rose up from the ground like a metal fortress. Preth could see the Zirathi defensive positions. 3 guard towers. Automated turrets. A garrison of at least 50 soldiers. When the transport doors opened, Sarah Duncan didn't hesitate. She ran toward the main gate, and the rest of the team followed. Preth found himself moving with them, his weapons raised, his targeting system locked onto the Zirathi positions. The first shots came from the guard towers. Laser fire burned across the ground, kicking up dirt and stone. Marcus threw himself behind a rock formation and returned fire. Patricia was providing cover from another angle. Chris was running with charges toward the main entrance. Preth noticed something unusual. Chris was terrified. The recruit's hand shook. His breathing was ragged. His heart rate was elevated well beyond what would be optimal for combat. By every measurement Preth had, the young human should have been too afraid to function. Instead, Chris moved forward into the fire. When a Zirathi soldier emerged from the gate, Chris didn't hesitate. He fired. The soldier went down. Then Chris kept moving. Toward the door. Toward the danger. Toward the place where he was most likely to die. One of the Zirathi began to advance toward their position. Marcus was caught in the open, reloading his weapon. He was vulnerable. This was basic tactical evaluation. The Zirathi had a clear shot. Then Patricia stepped into the space between Marcus and the Zirathi. She raised her weapon. She fired. The Zirathi fell. But Patricia had moved out of cover to do it. Now she was the one exposed. Preth's tactical system screamed at him. This was illogical. Patricia had sacrificed her own survival to protect Marcus's survival. In terms of pure mathematics, they had traded one life for another. The net gain was 0, but Patricia was still alive. She had crossed 10 meters of open ground, and neither the turrets nor the Zirathi soldiers had managed to hit her. Luck, perhaps. Or something else. Sarah Duncan fought her way into the main facility. Behind her came the rest of the team. Preth found himself in the center of a corridor, laser fire coming from both directions. A younger Zirathi soldier was advancing on his position. Preth raised his weapon and fired. The Zirathi soldier fell. This was basic combat logic. Nothing strange. Nothing unusual, but then Sarah was there, pulling the injured Chris away from the combat zone. Chris had been grazed by a laser blast. His armor was smoking. He should have been panicking. Instead, he was moving as quickly as his legs could carry him. Go! Sarah was shouting. Move, move, move! They reached the data vault. Marcus planted explosives on the lock mechanism. 30 seconds to detonation. Preth calculated their escape route. They wouldn't make it. There was no possible way they could move through the facility, clear the exterior, and reach the transport before the explosives detonated. When the lock blew, when the vault opened, the team didn't run. They moved with purpose. Sarah grabbed the data storage units. Marcus continued covering their retreat. Patricia was supporting Chris, who was barely able to walk now. The ground shook. The facility was collapsing from the chain reactions. Dust filled the corridors. Alarms screamed through every speaker. Preth's tactical display showed the transport lifting off in the distance. They had exactly 90 seconds to reach it. They made it in 87 seconds as the transport rose up into the atmosphere. Preth ran his data analysis. The mission had succeeded. The humans had obtained the research data. The facility was destroyed. Their casualties were light. Chris had taken a serious injury. The medical analysis suggested he would survive, but the numbers didn't capture what Preth had observed. When Patricia had stepped in front of Marcus, she had not calculated that move. She had not processed the odds. She had simply acted. She had seen that Marcus was in danger, and she had removed the danger. The emotions involved were something Preth's people theoretically didn't experience, but he recognized them for what they were. When Chris had continued fighting despite his injury, despite his fear, he had made a choice. The choice wasn't logical. It was based on something else. Something that Preth didn't have a name for. Sarah Duncan had led the team not with commands, but with example. She had moved into danger first. She had come out last. She had made every decision with the same priority: her soldiers' survival. When Preth returned to Vex Admiral Krell's command ship, the Zalari officer made his report. The humans are weak, Preth began. Yes, Krell said. They are slow. They are fragile. Their lifespan is limited. By every measurable standard, they are inferior to our species. Yes, Krell said. Preth paused. His crystalline structure shifted as he processed something that had no logical explanation. But something is wrong with the data, Preth said finally. Something is missing from my analysis. What do you mean? Krell asked. The humans should not have succeeded. The odds were against them. The defensive position was superior. The Zirathi soldiers were better trained and better equipped. And yet the humans succeeded anyway. Krell waited. He wanted to hear what Preth would say next. I believe, Preth said slowly, that the humans are not fighting for survival. They are fighting for something else. For each other. For their mission. For something that transcends pure logic. Fear? Krell suggested. No, Preth said. Something stronger than fear. Something that makes fear irrelevant. Krell stood and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the human fleet was regrouping. Somewhere out there, Commander Daniel Hayes was preparing for the next battle. And for the first time since the war began, Krell understood that his enemy was not calculating their chances. They had already accepted their chances. They had already accepted the possibility of death, which meant they were capable of something that the Zirathi had never encountered before. True resistance, true sacrifice, true danger. Fighting next to humanity, I felt true fear for the first time. Part 3. The crack in certain Admiral Krell requested a personal assignment. His commanders were surprised. A Zirathi admiral did not request frontline positions. Admirals commanded from distance. Admirals made decisions based on data and tactical advantage. Admirals did not walk into battle themselves, but Krull couldn't learn what he needed to learn from a command bridge. He had to see the humans up close. He had to understand them in a way that data couldn't provide. He was approved for a single observation mission. A human unit was being assigned to reinforce a defensive position that the Zirathi had heavily attacked. The humans were not expected to survive long. They were holding a position until reinforcements could arrive. If reinforcements could arrive. When Krull arrived at the defensive position, he found a human named David Park already there. David was an engineer, not a combat soldier. He had been injured in the last battle, and medical clearance had only just returned him to duty. His left arm was still weak from the healing process, but the weapon system was broken, and nobody else knew how to fix it. David was working on the firing mechanism when a Zirathi laser blast tore through the wall. Dust fell like snow. The blast had come closer to David than it should have. The engineer didn't even stop working. "You should find cover," Krull said. David looked up. His human face showed confusion at the sight of a Zirathi officer in their defensive position. "Can't," David said. "System needs to be operational in 10 minutes or we lose the eastern perimeter. Then you will be killed before you finish." David smiled. It was a strange expression on a human face. Something between resignation and determination. "Probably," David said. "But at least I'll go down trying." Krull found this response meaningless and also impossible to ignore. The weapon system came online with 6 minutes to spare. David stepped back and tested the targeting. It worked perfectly. The engineer sat down heavily, blood running down his neck from where a piece of shrapnel had caught him. "How long can you hold the perimeter?" Krull asked. "As long as we need to," David said. "Or until we're all dead. Whichever comes first." The next human Krull observed was Captain Lauren Wood. Lauren was leading the defensive unit that held the southern section of the perimeter. She was tall, dark-skinned, and her eyes moved constantly, assessing the situation. She made decisions with speed. When a position became untenable, she moved her soldiers. When the Zirathi tried to flank them, she countered. When ammunition ran low, she rationed it. But there was something else. A moment when a young soldier was killed in an explosion. The blast was huge. The soldier had been too close. There was nothing left to retrieve. Lauren didn't pause. She didn't grieve. She simply moved the next soldier into the empty position and continued fighting. But Krull saw something in her eyes. Something that flashed across her face for just a moment. And then it was gone, locked away, put aside for later. The human had felt something. Krull was certain of this. The human had mourned. The human had been affected. And yet the human had continued anyway. "Why do you not withdraw?" Krull asked Lauren. "Because if we do, the Zirathi break through here and they hit the main encampment. Everyone there dies, but you will die anyway if you stay." Lauren looked at him with eyes that carried exhaustion and something else. Something that looked like certainty. "Maybe," she said, "but not alone, and not without fighting." The battle lasted for hours. The Zirathi threw assault after assault against a human position. Each time, the humans held. Each time, more humans died. Each time, the humans fought harder. Krull sent a request through his command channel. He wanted to remain with the humans for the entire duration of the defense. His commanders denied his request. He was a Zirathi admiral. He could not be risked in direct combat. So Krull made a choice that no Zirathi admiral had ever made. He shut off his communications. He disabled his tracking beacon. And he stayed with the humans anyway. When reinforcements finally arrived, 8 hours later, the human position had taken 90% casualties. Of the 50 soldiers who had started the defense, only 5 remained standing. David Park was one of them. His arm was bleeding badly now. The healing injury reopened. But he was still there. Still moving. Still fighting. Lauren Wood was also there. She had lost most of her unit. She had seen friends die. She had made impossible choices about who to save and who would have to hold a position that meant certain death. When the Zirathi finally broke and retreated. When the position was finally secured, Lauren sat down in the dust and she cried. Hard, quiet tears that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Krell observed this. The human had held the line. The human had survived. The human had succeeded in the mission. And the human was still grieving for the people she had lost. This made no logical sense. The mission was complete. The objective was accomplished. By any measure of tactical success, the situation was resolved. And yet Lauren Wood was mourning. Krell returned to his flagship with new data. He analyzed it. He ran calculations. He tried to find logical explanations for what he had observed. He couldn't. The data kept pointing to the same conclusion. The humans were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were something else. His commanding officers wanted a report. Krell provided it, but it was incomplete. It lacked the certainty that all Zirathi reports carried. It suggested possibilities rather than conclusions. It asked questions rather than provided answers. The Zirathi High Command summoned Krell. They wanted explanations for the failed assaults. They wanted to know why the conquest was taking longer than expected. They wanted the war to end. Krell sat before the council and told them the truth. The humans could not be conquered through standard military doctrine. Every assault they made was countered. Every position they took was defended. Every victory they won came at great cost. But it came. Then we will accept their surrender, the council said. They will not surrender, Krell said. Everyone surrenders eventually. No, Krell said. The humans surrender when they have no choice left. But they always choose to fight first. The council dismissed him. They would find another commander, someone more capable, someone who understood proper military strategy. Krell was clearly failing in his duties, but as Krell left the council chamber, he felt something shifting inside his crystalline structure. Something was changing in him. Something fundamental. He had always known certainty. He had always known the correct course of action. He had always known that the Zirathi were superior and that victory was inevitable. Now he knew only doubt, and doubt was far more terrifying than any weapon. Krell made a new decision. He sent a message to Commander Daniel Hayes. The message was simple. I request a meeting. I request to understand your people. I request to fight alongside them. I request to fight alongside them. There was a long pause before the reply came. But eventually, it did. Approved, Daniel Hayes said. Welcome to the war, Admiral Krell. Fighting next to humanity, I felt true fear for the first time. Part 4. Fear takes root. The Zirathi military command learned about Krell's defection within hours. A Zirathi admiral fighting alongside humans was not something that could be kept secret. The decision was immediate and absolute. Krell was declared enemy of the Zirathi state. His assets were seized. His family was placed under arrest. His rank was stripped. Krell felt nothing about these things. He had already made his choice. When he arrived at the human base, Commander Daniel Hayes met him with a formal salute. No hesitation. No suspicion. Just the acceptance of a warrior who understood that another warrior had chosen to change sides. Thank you for coming, Daniel said. I am here to understand, Krell said. After that, I am here to fight. The mission Daniel was planning was unlike anything the Zirathi had ever conceived. It was a frontal assault on a heavily fortified Zirathi position in the mountains. There was no clever flank. There was no hidden approach. The humans would walk directly toward the strongest defensive position, and they would try to break through by all calculations. It was suicide. When Daniel showed Krell the plan, Krell's first response was shock. "This will fail," Krell said. "Maybe," Daniel said, "but it will also hurt them, and it will buy time for the main offensive. But the casualties will be catastrophic." "Probably," Daniel said, "but those soldiers are ready to pay that cost." Krell didn't understand. He ran the numbers again. The human assault force had a 32% chance of success, which meant they had a 68% chance of failure. A 68% chance meant people dying. Young people. Soldiers like Chris, who had fought so hard just days ago. "How many will die?" Krell asked. Daniel's face was hard. "Maybe 200. Maybe more. Out of 700 total soldiers. 200 casualties. Nearly 30% of the force." Krell had commanded fleets that accepted casualties at that rate, but it was always in the context of calculated risk. This was different. Daniel wasn't pretending the casualties wouldn't matter. He wasn't hiding from them. He was facing them head-on and making the choice anyway. The night before the assault, Krell found Daniel in the command center. The commander was alone, staring at the tactical display of the battlefield. "Are you afraid?" Krell asked. Daniel looked at him. "Yes." No elaboration. No excuse. Just the simple truth. "Why do you go forward if you are afraid?" "Because I have to," Daniel said. "Because my soldiers are counting on me. Because the defense of this position matters. Because if we don't attack here, people die somewhere else instead." Krell processed this response. It was logical in a way that transcended pure mathematics. It was logic that included humanity inside of it. The next morning, the assault began. 700 soldiers moved down the mountain toward the Zirathi position. Laser fire came down like rain. The ground erupted. Soldiers fell. Some stood back up. Some didn't. The assault force moved forward anyway. Krell was moving with them, his weapons firing at the Zirathi defensive positions. A laser blast passed so close to his crystalline body that he felt the heat of it. This was fear. Real, physical fear. The knowledge that death was possible. That it could end, right here, right now. But the humans were walking into worse than that. Krell watched a young soldier move into the open, laying down suppressive fire for his team. The Zirathi were targeting him. He was the most visible threat. He was the most exposed. And he stayed there anyway, firing burst after burst, giving his team the time they needed to advance. The soldier's name was Robert. He took a blast to the chest. His armor smoked and he went down. Another soldier, a woman named Helen, immediately rushed to his position. She was carrying a medical kit. She was also carrying a weapon. She had to choose between treating Robert and defending their position. She did both. She shot at the Zirathi with one hand while she treated Robert's wound with the other. "Go!" Robert was shouting. "Keep moving!" But Helen wouldn't leave. She dragged Robert to better cover, and she stayed with him, defending him, protecting him, keeping him alive until another soldier could arrive to take over. Krell saw a pattern in this. The humans weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting for each other. A more senior soldier, a man named Frank, was directing the advance. He was old for a soldier, probably in his 50s. He had been in the military for decades. He was moving through the assault with a calmness that seemed impossible. Laser fire was all around him. Soldiers were falling. The odds were terrible. And Frank moved forward with the confidence of someone who had already accepted death. Krell understood what was happening. The fear that should have paralyzed these soldiers was not paralyzing them. It was clarifying them. It was pushing them forward. It was making them stronger. This was a kind of strength that the Zirathi didn't have. The Zirathi conquered through superiority. The humans fought through acceptance. The assault force reached the defensive position's outer wall. They were using explosives now. The wall was breaching. Soldiers were pouring through the gap. Krell moved with them. He was terrified. His crystalline structure was vibrating with fear. And he was also moving forward. He was also fighting. He was also choosing to go into the danger. The Zirathi soldiers defending the position were confused. They were facing not only human soldiers, but also a Zirathi officer fighting alongside them. The information was contradictory. The tactical display was contradictory. By the time they understood what was happening, they had already lost the position. The assault succeeded. The human force had taken 217 casualties. 31% of the soldiers who went up that mountain did not come back down alive. Dozens more were injured. The human casualty rate was devastating, but the position was taken. The Zirathi defenses had broken, and the humans were already planning the next advance. As the remaining soldiers regrouped, Krell found Daniel again. 217 dead, Krell said. I know, Daniel replied. His face was heavy with the weight of it. And you led them forward knowing this would happen. Yes. How do you live with this? Krell asked. Daniel looked out at the battlefield. There were bodies everywhere. There were soldiers grieving. There was pain and loss and terrible cost. By making sure it means something, Daniel said. By making sure every death matters. By making sure we advance the mission. By making sure we don't waste their sacrifice. Krell felt something shift inside him. It was small and sharp, and it hurt like nothing else. It was the understanding that the humans were not just brave. They were not just strong. They were also wise in a way that transcended pure logic. They understood that some things were worth dying for. The Zirathi had never understood this. The Zirathi fought because they were superior. The humans fought because something mattered more than their own survival. Krell felt the fear again, but it was different now. It was not fear of defeat. It was fear of what he was becoming. Fear of understanding the humans. Fear that he could never go back to his old certainty. Fear that the humans might be right. Fighting next to humanity, I felt true fear for the first time. Part 5. The choice. 6 weeks passed. 6 weeks of fighting alongside humans. 6 weeks of learning what it meant to surrender certainty. 6 weeks of watching soldiers choose to die so that others could live. Krell had earned the respect of the human soldiers. They didn't treat him as an alien. They treated him as a soldier. They shared food with him. They asked his advice. When Marcus was wounded in a mine blast, Krell carried him to the medical bay. When Patricia was pinned down by Zirathi fire, Krell provided covering fire until she could advance. When Chris, the young recruit, broke down after witnessing his first soldier die, Krell sat with him for hours without speaking. The Zirathi High Command had grown impatient. Messages came from the Zirathi homeworld. They wanted results. They wanted victories. They wanted Krell's replacement to report that the human threat was diminishing. Instead, every report showed human forces advancing. Every report showed the Zirathi losing ground. Every report showed something incomprehensible happening on the battlefield. The Zirathi High Command made a decision. They would end the war through a single massive assault. They would gather every available warship. They would assault the human position with overwhelming force. They would break the human will to fight through sheer numerical superiority. The order came through on a quiet evening. Krell was standing on the observation deck when he received it. In 72 hours, the entire Zirathi fleet would arrive to exterminate the human forces. Krell looked at the order. Then he looked out at the stars. Then he looked at the planet below where humans were still fighting, still believing that tomorrow mattered. still choosing to get up and fight another day, despite knowing that annihilation was coming. Krell made his choice. He called a full conference with the human military leadership. Daniel, Sarah, Marcus, Patricia, and all the commanders gathered to hear what the Zirathi Admiral had to say. The Zirathi High Command has ordered a final assault, Krell said. They will arrive in 72 hours with overwhelming force. They expect that this assault will destroy your military capacity and force your unconditional surrender. The room was silent. I have calculated the odds, Krell continued. There is no defensive position that can hold against the full Zirathi fleet. There is no tactical advantage that will allow you to survive. Your military will be destroyed. Daniel nodded slowly. He had already known this would come eventually. Every day of fighting was borrowed time. I am offering you an alternative, Krell said. I am ordering my fleet to stand down. I am ordering all Zirathi forces under my command to cease hostile actions. I am offering surrender to the Zirathi High Command. The room erupted. Soldiers stood up. Officers shouted questions. Daniel raised his hand and the room fell silent. Why? Daniel asked. Krell looked at the human commander. Because I have learned something that my people do not understand. The Zirathi fight to conquer. The humans fight to protect. In any war between conquest and protection, protection will always prevail eventually. It may take longer. It may cost more. But the motivation is stronger. That won't stop the Zirathi, Daniel said. No, Krell agreed. But perhaps it will convince them. I will surrender my fleet and my position to you. I will explain to the High Command why. If they will not listen, then they will at least have to contend with 2 enemies instead of 1. Sarah Duncan spoke up. They'll execute you for treason. Yes, Krell said. That is likely. Then why do it? She asked. Krell considered the question. He thought about David Park working on weapon systems while laser fire cut through the walls. He thought about Lauren Wood holding a position and then grieving for the soldiers she had lost. He thought about Frank moving forward with acceptance of death. He thought about Helen treating an injured soldier while still defending him. He thought about all the humans he had known who chose to do the right thing even when the right thing meant dying. Because, Krell said, fighting next to humanity has made me human, and I cannot go back. The Zirathi High Command responded immediately. Krell's fleet was in mutiny. Krell himself was removed from command and declared an enemy of the state. The assault would proceed. The human forces would be destroyed. Krell would be captured and brought to trial. But something changed when Krell's fleet stopped fighting. Zirathi soldiers who had been fighting on the front lines suddenly had questions. If their own admiral could defect, could they? If an alien species was capable of choosing humanity, were they capable of the same? The High Command ordered the assault anyway. But the assault did not come for another week. The Zirathi military was fracturing from within. More officers were questioning orders. More soldiers were refusing to advance. The certainty that had defined the Zirathi conquest was cracking. When the assault finally came, it was weaker than expected. Entire battle groups were missing. Entire squadrons of fighters were grounded. The forces that did arrive fought with less coordination, less precision, less certainty. But humans held, and more than that. They advanced about 1 week after the failed assault. The Zirathi High Command requested negotiations. Krell, now a prisoner being held under guard on the human station, was brought to the negotiation chamber. The High Command's representative was ancient, even by Zirathi standards. She had crystalline patterns that spoke of centuries of life. Her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never questioned a single decision. Why did you betray us? She asked. Krell looked at her, and he saw his old self reflected back. He saw the certainty he had once carried. He saw the belief that superiority was everything. Because I learned that there is something stronger than superiority, Krell said. There is loyalty. There is sacrifice. There is the willingness to die for something beyond yourself. The humans taught me this. And you believe this is worth abandoning your entire civilization? I believe, Krell said, that if your civilization cannot learn what I have learned, then your civilization deserves to lose. But I also believe that you can learn. I believe that the Zirathi can become more than we are. The ancient Zirathi looked at Krell for a long moment. Then she made a decision that shocked every Zirathi who heard about it. She ordered the cessation of hostilities. She called for direct negotiations with human leadership. She ordered the immediate release of all Zirathi forces from the war effort. It took 6 months for the war to officially end. It took a year for the peace to be officially signed. It took 5 years for the Zirathi and humans to establish a formal alliance. Krell was never tried for treason. Instead, he was made the ambassador between the two species. He spent his remaining years building bridges between civilizations that had once tried to destroy each other. On the day that Krell officially retired from his position, Daniel Hayes came to see him off. They stood together on a neutral station, looking out at the space where 2 fleets once fought. Did you ever regret it? Daniel asked. No, Krell said. Fear is temporary. Regret is temporary. But the memory of standing next to humans and understanding what true strength means, that is permanent. Will your people accept what you have learned? Some will, Krell said. Some will always believe that strength is about power and dominance. But others will see what I saw. They will understand that humanity has something special. Something that transcends biology and advantage. Daniel put his hand on Krell's crystalline shoulder. It was a gesture of friendship, of respect, of understanding between 2 beings who had chosen each other over certainty. Thank you, Daniel said. Krell looked at the human commander who had shown him what it meant to choose something larger than yourself. Thank you, Krell said back, for teaching me to be afraid of the right things. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. The war was over. The fear was gone, but the understanding remained, burning bright in both of them, a memory of the day that an alien learned what it meant to be human, and the day that fear became the beginning of something beautiful.